Welcome back to Venture Recap, a podcast where we sit down with the founders reshaping markets and industries with bold ideas and serious execution. I'm Matt, and today we're diving into the world of AI-powered drug discovery, where synthetic biology, machine learning, and nature itself converge to solve some of the most pressing medical diseases. Our guest today is building something remarkable. At his company, he and his team are harnessing the hidden potential of evolution, not just as an inspiration, but as a data source. Their platform is a next-gen drug discovery engine that uses artificial intelligence to scan the dark matter of genomic data, creating molecules shaped by nature and refined by machine intelligence. So think ChatGPT, but instead of text, it's producing novel peptides, proteins, and RNAi therapeutics aimed at some tough diseases. So we're talking about drug discovery that's faster, cheaper, and more precise, and a model that's built for not just for impact, but for scalability. Joining me today is Dermot Tierney, co-founder and chief operating officer of AMPLY Discovery. Dermot brings decades of experience in commercialization, licensing, and building deep tech ventures, and he's on a mission to reinvent how medicines are found, developed, and brought to the market. Dermot, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Matt. It's good to see you.
Good to see you as well. So Dermot, let's start with the big picture. What was it about Amply that convinced you to leave the world of tech transfer and jump in as a co-founder? Was there a moment when it all clicked for you?
So thanks. There probably was. I suppose the very short answer is the team that I was going to be working with or would start the business with. But I suppose the slightly longer answer is that I had spent over a decade working in technology transfer. And I should note from the outset, I'm the generalist in the team. So I'm the person that deals with everything except the delivery of the technology. So if it's commercial, if it's investment, if it's HR, it's all me. And with that background, I had moved into technology transfer probably a decade earlier after completing an MBA and being at this kind of crossroads in life. At that stage, I had this itch that I really wanted to find my own thing, jump into an early stage startup. And I thought that tech transfer at the time, technology transfer, which is, the sort of the touch point between university research and industry, would be a really good place to learn about venture capital, about deep tech, about commercialization of university spin-outs. And it might be an opportunity as well to find a technology, a platform, and or a team that I could work with. And my idea at the time was I'll work in this space for about a year. I'll find something brilliant. I'll spin that out. And then, shortly after, I'll buy an island. And it didn't quite work out like that in terms of the timing for various reasons. Number one, that just the space was too interesting to leave. It was like a sort of golden pair of handcuffs that you're working with academics, you're working all of these interesting ideas. There's so many different ways to there's never a wrong answer. There's so many different ways to commercialize a technology or not commercialize it in many cases. And I enjoyed that process too much, and there was always something else to learn. So I ended up really a decade later, I still hadn't found the right thing to jump into, but I was always interested in the interface of health and software. So I'd spent a lot of time working in software. I'd moved to a university based in Northern Ireland that had a big focus on health, and I was interested in finding something at that interface. This is probably in 2015. So to find something at that interface of health and software. And I thought that would be something in patient records, something in, AI patient records, helping clinicians understand or prioritize or make decisions. And Amply came along, and how that comes along in the tech transfer piece is the academic, in this case was Dr. Ben Thomas, who's now my co-founder. He knocked on my door one day with a new invention that he'd been working on for a number of years. It was a PhD. It was essentially a discovery engine, a serendipity engine, if you like, that could really easily identify effective functional molecules in this sea of data, metagenomic and genomic data. And I thought it was really interesting. And the more we got into it and the more we worked on it, and in my role trying to help him advance the potential for commercialization, the first thing you do really is talk to industry, figure out, is there a market there? Can this invention actually, solve a problem? So the more work we did on that, the more it became apparent that there is something in this. There's something in the technology platform. It just needed focus. We just need to aim at the right therapeutic areas. We just need to find the right space. We needed to formulate it in a way where we could spin it out and find capital. But it became pretty clear that this was really interesting to me. And the business model that I felt we could advance was a licensing business model, a drug discovery studio, if you like. And that really suited my background and what I was good at, which was intellectual property and intellectual property licensing. So the fit of the technology and what I could provide to the team was really good. And then the team itself, working with the team, I thought, well, look, this is a team that I could work with. And I thought quite simply that, look, even if we don't get it exactly right, I thought with this team, with us together, it's the type of team that we'll be able to figure out a way to get it right. Because, really in my experience working in technology transfer, I've seen so many spinouts over the years. And the failure points, I've seen so many of the failure points relate back to team. I always tend to look at three things that make a good university spin out. One is, do they have a really good team that can actually form the basis of a commercial team in the company? Is it a platform technology? It's going to be more than a single product. And does it have at least a $500 million market potential? And within the context of that, I've seen team being, a really difficult issue and a difficult challenge. Bringing in a lot of people with competing ideas, can they actually work together is a big thing. So that was kind of what drove me to really decide, look, I'm going to jump into this. Was that I thought it was a great technology. I thought it was really interesting. I had a skill set that could add value, and I thought there was a team here that I could really work with and enjoy working with. Was, I suppose, the critical thing.
There's a lot to unpack there, but
it's a very long answer.
Thank you so much, and we'll take certain elements of it and then dig a little bit deeper. But I love working with universities. I love working with spinouts from universities. I have a lot of love and respect for academia. Many of my friends are still in academia. I personally didn't choose that path, but I find myself drawn to academia. And you see wonderful ideas. You see cutting edge research, published papers, but it's very difficult for those ideas to sort of make the leap from academia into the practical world. Yeah. And unless it makes that leap to the commercial world and is offered people, purchasers, companies, whoever that end user group would be, then the research kind of gets to be stale over a period of time in certain cases. And so you've worked with over 50 spinouts in your career. Tell us a little bit about the environment in Ireland with the university that you were at, and what have you learned, how you got started there, and is there a model? You mentioned some elements, but is there a model, is there a template that other universities around the world could use to spin out the immense knowledge that's generated there by way of their students and professors?
Yeah, so I think my career in technology transfer has traversed a lot of different types of office and types of university. So I've worked in Ireland, I've worked in Northern Ireland, in the UK, and I suppose the common denominator is that quite often there's a reasonably mature structure there, and the structure is typically based on the technology transfer office setup, and it will have a series of components that either one people or a team of people will fill. So there will usually be a function that deals with partnering, so research collaboration with industry. There will be a function that will deal with intellectual property, and sometimes the legal, the transactional side of things. there will be a function that will deal with what I would call the biz dev. There will be a function that will deal with the investment side of things. And typically a tech transfer office will have all of those things. And then how it's structured, whether it's in the university, whether it's a standalone entity, all of that varies depending on just your flavor and your preference. And frankly, the timing. Universities I've seen go through cycles where it has an entity which is a standalone entity outside the university. 20 years pass, new people come in, and then the philosophy changes and they want to then integrate it. So these things tend to happen. I think the UK model is very similar to the US. I think the key differences really tend to be scale. And in my experience working in most recently in Queen's University in Belfast, the activity level of the technology transfer office in terms of being really, really hands-on. So I think in the US, a lot of times what is a great situation to be in is that the ecosystem can lift a spin out. So an academic can come out of Stanford, they can have a brilliant idea, they can go to some mixers in the evening, meet a few interesting venture capitalists, bada bing, bada boom, the ecosystem lifts the potential of that new idea and technology, and a new company is formed. I think in the UK and certainly in Northern Ireland, which is one of the most underserved regions in the UK because of a long legacy of the politics involved here, that we don't have that ecosystem that sort of lifts all boats, if you like. So the university has to be set up where people will get very hands-on. And when people get very hands-on, like I got very hands-on with Amply and with the work, it can lead to scenarios where then the tech transfer person will jump out and they'll fulfill that commercial role. But I think in my experience, I think the region and elements will really dictate the models that you should use. So, for example, a model that works in the States, in my experience, is not going to work exactly in the UK. It's certainly not going to work then in a smaller economy, open economy like Ireland, for example. You have regulatory and legal considerations that are different in each entity. So, for example, in the US, you have the Bayh-Dole Act. You don't have the same type of thing that's in place in the UK. In Ireland, you have something that probably sits in between. It's called the Knowledge Transfer Protocol, and it was an attempt to put a protocol in place that would add a structure to Irish universities and commercialization of research in Ireland. So that's been a really good process. It makes a bit more uniform what the technology transfer offices do. But I think that the process is always the same. It's always based on working together collaboratively with an academic, a principal investigator or a researcher that actually wants to commercialize their research. They want to engage with industry. That's the key first step, is they want to engage. Because I think we always have to understand that academics, they do not have to engage. It's, they can do their research, they can publish their papers, they can move on. Commercialization is something that an academic does not get paid extra for doing the commercialization piece. And it's all well and good when they have an exit and they make some money from that. But that is few and far between, those types of exit that can happen. And there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that go into that journey. So quite often the academics that engage in particularly spinning out a technology, they should really be applauded, because there's so much that they have to do. It's like taking on a third job quite often for them. So quite often working with that academic is key, that wants to actually engage. And then after that, it becomes very sort of formulaic. You start with your customer discovery. You start trying to figure out, because bear in mind, this is a technology push proposition. And I think this is one of the reasons that makes university commercialization so difficult. Very rarely have you started out with a problem, which is often seen and is the best way, I think, to start a business. It's much more common in the university. You've done the research, you have something that you think could add value, but the problem is the thing that is a little bit undiscovered, a little bit undefined. So you sometimes have to go through a customer discovery journey, whether it's yourself or whether there's a program or an accelerator can help. Here in Ireland, in Queen's, we have an accelerator that allows us to go through that process. It's an accelerator that we work with Queen's, or I say I work with Queen's Spinouts on, but other universities around the UK were able to join in as well. And so that whole process allows you to go through engaging with industry, talking about your technology, talking about the problems that they would have, asking open questions and trying to find where that fit might be. And then based on that, and based on that insight that you otherwise wouldn't have, talking to 100 different potential customers or users or experts in that sector in your domain, it then becomes then easier to map out, okay, well, how would this fit? How could this technology, whatever it might be delivered into the market? What would be your business model? How could we make money from this? Could this be an attractive proposition for investors? What could the business look like? And so on. So that's usually the process that I was most familiar with. And frankly, it doesn't really, the mechanics can be a little bit different depending on the country and depending on the university, but the basics are frankly always the same in my experience, in my opinion.
So, so is that the reason why Amply has taken a studio-like model to drug discovery? I mean, why was that the right model for the company, and how do you think about striking a balance between technical proof of concept and commercial viability once you spin out of the university environment?
Hey there, listeners. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the future of markets, take a moment to support the show. Hit that like button, share this episode with fellow investors and market enthusiasts, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an update. Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, so it was one of the things that I loved actually about working on the different technologies was that stage that we often got to, which was figuring out the business model. I really liked, it was just a little sort of, I found it a very enjoyable aspect, looking at different business models, assessing how different business models worked and didn't work, and sort of drawing parallels with the technology and how it could be developed, because there are many ways to skin a cat, and there are often many ways to make money from different technical innovations that come out from the university. I think that the thinking from our perspective when we came out with Amply, it was pretty clear to us that we had a decision to make quite early on, and it was really a philosophical decision in a way, given the space that we were in. And the way I define it is that the business model for tech bio companies is a spectrum, and at one end of the spectrum you have a pure SaaS type of business model. You productize what you've got and you sell that in a SaaS like manner. There's maybe the ability to bolt on services to that, but that's the core of what you do. At the other end of the spectrum, you have much more of a biotech driven model. So you use your platform as a way to generate better assets, but you ultimately, your product is the asset, the molecule. And ultimately that you want to develop that to a certain stage. You ideally, probably from our perspective, want to license that at a certain point in time. But equally, you might be even more ambitious and want to take that deep into the clinic. So I think my view was pretty simple, that in this stage of the segment that we're in, the AI side of things is moving fast. It's very, very difficult to protect. You very difficult to protect and put a patent around your foundational models. And in many ways, you probably don't want to, because even if you had a patent, it might be very difficult to enforce. And so, but you can patent a molecule. It's the fundamental way you would look to advance. So owning that asset, having control over that asset, ultimately then licensing that asset, just felt right. It felt sensible. It felt like something that the team had the skill set to do. And I think secondly, it also felt like the play where there was greater upside, frankly. So it felt like this what I've called the SaaS end of the spectrum. That felt like a low risk but low reward approach. And the other route of generating potentially an entire suite of novel medicines was much more risky. We'd have to deploy much more capital ourselves and raise more capital to advance these programs. But ultimately, what you own and the value of what you own is significantly greater. So it became really a choice based on what was our ambition, and where do we feel we could add value, and ultimately what type of business did we want to build. So that's where the decision making came. But yeah, there was many a long night spent discussing that and trying to figure out what was best. And there was many different opinions at the time, and many opinions, and people suggested the first approach, the SaaS approach. And in many ways, the funny thing about it is there really is no right or wrong answer, and I still don't know that we for sure know the right answer. I think it's just a case that the team has to get together. They have to have a shared vision and agreement on what they want to do, and then you have to then just go for it. So that's the route that we took. So we've definitely taken what I tend to refer to as the approach that has the greater risk, but with that greater risk, we think there's a much higher reward potential in the scheme of things. So that was the thinking.
So quite a number of elements that have to come together and that came together in your case, in the case of Amply, to really get it out of the university system successfully while still connected to the academic work being done there, and then turn it into a commercially viable company, of course, a startup at this point, but hopefully with a growth trajectory. And now there are really no low-hanging fruits left anymore in the world of startups. It's not like, two guys just go into a garage and build it. I mean, maybe that's never been the case, but, one has to carry a realistic view of the world, of the commercial world, of the financial world, to really make their endeavor take off. But switching gears to Queen's University, Amply has a great example of deep academic science moving into the commercial world, and we talked about quite a few elements of that. I'm curious about Queen's University. What made Queen's University a particularly fertile ground for something like this to emerge? Were there specific institutional factors that helped?
Yeah, so I'm obviously biased. I've got a close affinity to Queen's, having worked there for so long, and now I haven't spun out the company. But I think when I first moved to Queen's, I came from a university where I'd worked a lot on software, and I was interested in, as I say, that interface between health and software. Queen's had a great reputation in Ireland for its biological sciences, pharmacy, and cancer research. And so there was a focus there on health and the natural sciences in Queen's that I felt there's an opportunity to jump in and learn. Queen's is a very well-established university in Ireland. It's based in Belfast. It's one of two major universities in Northern Ireland, so it's a very big fish in a small pond. But it's got a very, very strong reputation internationally, particularly in that in that health space. And Queen's, for a long time, has punched above its weight in terms of technology transfer metrics. These are often measured in the UK, and they're measured by different forms. And these types of metrics, like HIFE and KEF, will measure things like the invention disclosures per year at a university, the amount of spin-outs a university will generate, the amount of IP licenses a university will generate, the amount of collaborations. And I was always interested because for years, Queen's was in the top, 10, often in the top 5 in the UK for IP-related income. And that was really interesting because you're up there with Cambridge, you're up there with Oxford, and it's this, big university in Northern Ireland, but still, in the national scheme of things, what will be seen as one of the Russell Group, sort of the tier below, I suppose, frankly. But what is that university doing? What is happening in that entity that is allowing it to compete in the number of startups that it's doing and the revenue that it's generating from this type of work with the likes of an Oxford, a Cambridge, and Imperial, the kind of the best of the best in the UK. So that's what interested me. And my view is pretty simple, is that there were great systems and processes in Queen's, and those systems and processes have been developed through the years. And these can always be improved, and they still probably can. But the one thing that you can't change in the TTO, and the one thing you have no control over, is the science. And it really came back to, there was really, really great quality science, particularly in the cancer center and on the health side of things. And so I think that's what attracted me to working in Queen's, and that is, I think, what has helped Queen's over the years establish a really strong foothold in those metrics. And I think one of the big factors is that Queen's was working in technology transfer and really made a concerted effort 30 years ago. This was not born yesterday or 10 years ago. This was 30 years ago in very early stage work that was done and put in place by really visionary academics that were running the university. And they made really a big impact on that Northern Ireland ecosystem. A lot of the bigger, more innovative companies in Northern Ireland come from that Queen's ecosystem, like Kainos, for example, which is one of its, I suppose, more famous spin-outs, which is a listed company now. But that came originally from Queen's work going back probably 20, 35 years ago. So I think that's the thing that money can't buy. Quality science, you cannot buy that. No process that, on the technology transfer side that you can put in place will help you advance spin-outs if the science is actually not there in the first place.
Thank you so much. As far as I'm concerned, you guys are right there with the best of the best, of course, and we're very excited about AMPLY Discovery and all the prospects that it holds in the future. We talked a lot about technology transfer in the university environment. Of course, that's more naturally sort of your background. Let's take a step back for a minute. We'd love to have Ben on the show as well to talk more about the science, but let's tell our listeners a little bit more about, first of all, what is drug discovery? How is it done traditionally? And what are the new ways we could speed up drug discovery today using new computational methods, which is what you guys are working on?
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about that. I think our viewers, our listeners would love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. So in the most simplistic terms, drug discovery is the process of finding a new drug molecule that will affect in some way a disease in a patient. And traditionally how that has been done, people will often know, even people that aren't in the space will know just anecdotally the complexity involved in drug discovery. They will sometimes be aware vaguely that it's known to take well over 10, sometimes 15 years to bring a new drug to market, that bringing a new drug to market can cost upwards of $1 billion, that there's a lot of risk in the pipeline, and there is a pipeline of stages that a new drug will have to go through in order for that drug to be proven as it moves through what's called the preclinical phase through to then your clinical trial phases, phase 1 through phase 3 as it's tested in humans. I think what people are less aware of is that drug discovery has moved really, and biology in general has moved from what might have been traditionally considered to be a kind of a wet thing, a wet process, to essentially computational. And that's really what AMPLY is leveraging. We are now sitting in a moment where all of these different types of technology that AMPLY and the AMPLY team had nothing to do with building, so next generation sequencing, the ability to analyze the genomic information in a person or a thing, a plant or an animal, synthetic manufacture, the ability to synthetically produce molecules very, very quickly at scale. AI and machine learning, we're all more aware of on the machine learning side of things, but if you can imagine those same types of approaches but applied to this type of genomic or metagenomic data that I'm talking about, and then consider where when we analyze the genome of a patient or look at the metagenomic data in an environment, we are talking terabytes of data, so huge data pools that these systems can learn from and dig into, analyze and predict patterns in. So all of this is leading to a situation where drug discovery really is very computational. It tends to be now very driven by the identifying a certain target, understanding deeply the biology and how that particular target works, and then very precisely designing a new drug. The thing with maybe what people don't tend to think about so much is the toolbox that actually makes up new types of medicine. And so if you think of molecules simply as tools within this toolbox, You have now types of molecules like antibodies, proteins, peptides, RNA, DNA, all of these things make up molecules. And these exist within the drug discovery toolbox. For example, an RNA may be considered to be something like an Allen key. You're familiar with this in the States, or an Allen wrench. I don't know what exactly the term is, but it's very precise. You're going to bring it out when you need to do a certain job at a certain time, and it's very useful for one specific thing. On the other hand, you might have a modality, a type of molecule, like a small molecule, and small molecules are what we would know and consider to be the traditional element of drugs. This is the kind of the hammer in your toolbox. You're going to bring it out more often. So quite often, if people are taking a pill, an oral pill, to cure a certain disease or a certain ailment, then it'll more likely be a small molecule that they're taking. But nowadays, you clearly would like to be in a situation where you can go and you can take out your Allen key. You can be more precise about the job that you're doing, as opposed to just bashing the door to try to try and make things fit. And so, because of our ability to assess computationally what things look like, what the biology looks like, and then what a molecule needs to look like then to interact with that biology, we can very precisely create these new types of drugs. So that's really what drug discovery is nowadays. It's turning into much more of a computational game. Now, that's at the very early stage of the discovery side, where you're trying to figure out what drug, what molecule will actually have the effect that we want, and sometimes actually what effect do we want to have in the first place. So that's where it fits within that piece. As drug discovery moves on, then you start moving into more of a classical funnel, where you need to test that molecule. You need to test it in a number of different in vitro assays. We have our own framework of assays designed to test the different types of molecules that we're working with. You then want to move that maybe into ex vivo models, so organoid models that kind of approximate what maybe human biology might look like, and eventually you'll want to test it in vivo, so in a mouse, for example, in a complex biological system. And all of that is so that you can prove with no shadow of a doubt that this works in this biological system. And you have to do all of that. You have to get all of that proof. You have to be able to present it and stand over it and talk about it. You have to be able to do all of that before you can ever bring it into and test it in a human in your first in human clinical trial, which would be a phase 1 trial. So that's what we do. We cover the early stage, the discovery end of that. We are aiming to try and help make everything a little bit more certain, a little bit more predictable, by using our computational approaches to do that. So clearly, drugs will be expensive to produce, I think, no matter what. But if you can limit the failure rate, then you would be a lot happier about spending $1 billion to make a drug if you're 95% sure that drug will work. Less happy at the moment if there's only a 10% chance that it's actually going to work when you take it to that final stage. So that's essentially where we would fit in that pipeline.
And looking ahead, what's your personal vision for Amply over the next 3 to 5 years, maybe beyond? And what would success look like for you?
So we've just raised our recent round of funding, which is what we're calling that our seed round, and that will take us through what we're terming as our next stage of technical proof of concept. And so we, as I mentioned, have a platform technology, and one of the biggest difficulties with the platform technology is, where do you point this? So I've described something that's pretty brilliant, kind of slightly sci-fi, slightly fantastical. You can point it anywhere, and the decision of where you point it and how you actually operate it is kind of key to whether you might be successful or not. And so what we've done is focus on 2 therapeutic areas, and we're working in 2 different modalities in each of those areas. So part of our work focuses on drug-resistant lung infections. So these are lung infections where the actual pathogen is now resistant to conventional antibiotics. This is a huge issue. It's very complex. It's a very challenging commercial environment in that particular space. The other side of what we do then is focused on our siRNA work, where we look at essentially what are gene silencing therapeutics for complex types of cancer. So really difficult to treat cancer, highly stratified cancers like triple negative breast cancer, for example. So the next 18 months or so will be developing our proof of concept and showing proof of concept that we can use this platform to develop assets that we have validated through the end of a preclinical stage, that we can take these assets out of that stage of proof, and that these are valuable and that we can advance them further. And we believe that doing that and sort of like illustrating by doing will be very probative for the platform. That the platform, if we can show that it does work in 2 modalities as we expected, it does work in multiple therapeutic areas as we expected, that is a high level of proof in terms of the viability of the platform. And so what we want to then be able to advance those assets and partner and raise more investment and more money and partner and collaborate with downstream biopharma partners to take those assets then eventually into the clinic. But we also want to then rinse and repeat with the actual platform. We want to then take what we've done and we want to repeat it again. We want to take the next disease and the next disease and the next disease, because clearly if we can demonstrate effectively that the platform has that type of effect, that has to be the ultimate goal, is to create this never-ending cycle of serendipity where we're moving more quickly through the cycle of drug discovery. So that would be the aim, and clearly there's many a slip between that grand aim and actually the reality. But I think it's that's what we're hoping for, and that's what we're aiming for, and we're quite ambitious in that regard.
Well, Dermot, this has been a fantastic conversation. It's not every day we get to explore the intersection of machine learning, biology, and commercialization with someone who's navigated all 3 worlds so thoughtfully. Amply's story is a powerful reminder that the future of medicine might not come from building something entirely new, but from rediscovering what nature has already invented and scaling it with the right technology and vision. So whether it's treating drug-resistant infections, unlocking new cancer therapies, or rethinking how we even approach drug discovery, it's clear that Amply's on a path that's both ambitious and deeply grounded. And to our listeners, if you're as intrigued by this conversation as I am, definitely check out what Amply's doing. And if you're in the biotech world, this is one to keep a close eye on. Dermot, thank you again for being here and sharing your journey with me today. And for the rest of you, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Matt.